Greetings, and welcome to another episode of Foundational Foundry, the tutorial series from the Foundry Roundtable. I am Green Dragoon, and with me are my co-hosts, Duncan Idaho.
Hello!
Mark Hockman.
Hey.
And, of course, Drogon1701.
Hello.
We took a small detour last time to talk about Foundry downtime, and as it turns out, we didn't have any. It just goes to show, hope for the best, plan for the worst. With that aside, though, we can turn back to our Foundry project. When we last left off, we were working on our space map. We had set up a space battle where the player flies in and saves a freighter. This opens up an opportunity to demonstrate state transitions. Okay, so we've worked up a bit of a complex scene here. Which is...
Someone's got a little bit of feedback coming through.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put a NPC contact down. And this is going to represent our freighter after we've saved it. So he doesn't need to be shot at anymore. We need to be able to talk to him. And so now we've got a someone to talk to. I'm going to put him in. All right, so obviously it would be very confusing if we ended up with two freighters. So we're going to work out some states. And in fact, we're going to have to put a state on the Orions too, because we don't want them attacking our freighter until we're ready. So we're going to go ahead and sign a behavior. We don't need anything complicated. The combat will work for us here. There are several kinds.
Well, one quick note I'd like to throw in here is that you can have a dialogue window pop up even if you're not talking to a contact.
Oh yeah, that's what all these pop-up dialogues are. So they'll pop up regardless of a.
So if you can have the Hail Freighter thing actually just bring up a dialogue box without actually like talking to the ship.
All right, so let's do the Orions first. So under there's three tabs here along the side in the properties window, and the third one is states, and this is going to allow us to do something a little fancier. And this is in fact kind of the key to doing some pretty elaborate stuff if you really understand how it works. But for this one, we'll keep it somewhat simple. So we don't want him appearing until his objective is in progress. So this would be once the objective becomes active, that is to destroy the Orions. He won't appear until then, which means that he won't be trying to destroy our freighter until we complete the previous objective, which is to basically approach Trimble 5. So up until that point, he's not going to appear. And then once we get past that point, that's when he'll appear. And we're going to go ahead and do the same for our fighting freighter group here. And since the freighter group isn't tied to an objective, he has more options. But in this case, we also want a objective in progress. And so we're going to have to go ahead and select our objective to defeat the Orion Raiders. Now, in this case, once the fight's over, we don't want that group around anymore. We're going to swap it out for an NPC contact we can talk to. And so you'll see here it starts the initial state hidden, and then we set under what conditions it becomes visible. So then it moves to state visible. and then we can set again the conditions under which it becomes hidden again. So we are going to do objective complete, and so once the objective complete, defeat the Orion Raiders is complete, then our NPC group, which will be fighting the Orions, disappears, and our NPC contact, Federation Freighter, will appear with the following objective, which is the hail the freighter. And actually, just for completion, I'm going to go ahead and change this. So, objective in progress, hail the freighter. So just so they both line up. So the group will disappear, the contact will appear. And I'm hoping not getting too complicated for a first mission, but it's a good introduction to states. All right, so we are almost through this map, and so we'll go ahead and give a name to the freighter.
Purple Rose.
As good as anything. The SS Purple Rose. And just for consistency, I'm going to
Subcommander Kinner in the chat room says that he found states to be very intuitive when he first started playing with the editor. I kind of agree. I mean, it's all just about making sure that things appear and disappear exactly when you want them to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, once you get used to them, they're actually really not that hard. It's just as you start to build up more and more assets that are trying to all be based or change states based on these interactions, it becomes more and more complex to kind of keep track of everything and make sure that everything is happening at the right time based on the right events. And
Also, there's there's certain things you can't do, which you're not necessarily going to realize it until you start to really have fun with it. Like, you can't turn the state on and then back off and then on again. It only goes on and then off, and that's it.
Yeah.
You want the object to reappear after disappearing like that. Basically, you gotta put an identical object in there.
Okay, so I think we've reached the first instance where we're actually going to have to write a dialog more complex than just a single pane. We're actually going to go ahead and click on the Advanced Dialog Editor here, and this will take us to the Dialog tab. And we can actually see or build out more complex conversations this way. So we have the miss prompt over here, and we can use this to drag in new dialog boxes and kind of create trees. So the captain is going to ask, what happened to the USS Foundation? And our freighter is going to answer,
It went on a booze cruise.
not quite, but
Nothing so enjoyable, I suppose.
And that's just one quick note to make about the tone of your mission. It's something definitely to think about. But if you're not sure exactly how to approach that sort of thing, just go with the TV shows. It's what a lot of people are expecting. And if you want to be a little bit more creative, it's definitely something to take on as is something you really think about and something that you can sort of work around and make sure that it has the impact you want it to. Although one quick thing I wanted to say about states, if you copy and paste an object, it will carry over the states that you set for the original objects. So you don't need to necessarily keep replicating them. And for a lot of edits, changing the states on a large group of objects can be one of the most time-consuming things. So to save yourself a little time, if you know that you want to have a group of objects change states, set the state first, then copy and paste it, and make that full array.
Okay, so I've got a dialogue here basically saying that the USS Foundation, which was their the ship leading their convoy, has crashed on the surface below. And just because we're Starfleet officers and we really should ask the freighter if they need assistance.
No, we're good.
It seems like an obvious question, but it gives the player something to do.
Well, its absence would seem odd.
Yeah, something Captain Picard would always ask.
Yeah.
Are you in need of assistance?
Although one thing you can actually demonstrate now is the dialogue option.
Okay. What are you thinking?
Just get have do you need assistance as an option, and have just whatever you're gonna finish the conversation off with, have that as a secondary option for the second text box.
Okay. So if we want to have more than one option in a dialogue, we actually click this little paper plus icon, and that'll give us a second button choice. So in this case, I'm just going to have them go straight to repair and away team. Which is the same thing after they ask if the freighter if they need assistance, but okay, so here in this case we've got two different buttons that we want to lead to the same place. So in this case, no, we don't want to have to create like multiple versions of the same dialogue. We can actually take this little arrow right here, drag it down, point it to the dialogue we want it, and it'll actually create a link right to it. Let's go ahead and, we haven't done anything with the engineer. Let's have him. Hi, sir. We've located the USS Foundation on the surface. I just tend to leave it as continue if the captain doesn't have anything particular they need to say. All right, so that is all set. So either way, whether they offer assistance to the ship
one
or
other.
just
I was just going to make a quick note. You're also, when you're making these dialogues, you also have an animation button. And
Sure.
that has a very limited selection, but you can do a lot of subtle things with it, or not so subtle things. But it's something that you generally can get a lot of mileage out of. You click it, and you'll have your 5 or 6 options, and it'll set that particular officer in that mood. So it's not like a full animation like wave their hands, tap to communicate, or anything else like that. It's just basically a small stance. And it's automatically set to a default, which is just standing upright. You also have angry, which is sort of leaning forward towards the camera, arrogant, head tilted back, happy, which their head moves subtly. That one is actually probably the least dramatic of them, and maybe even something players won't notice. Scared.
It's just before establishing their it adds atmosphere to the conversation.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've even gone so far as using it to sort of indicate that they're looking down, they're looking up. It's something that can really add a lot to the dialogue.
So yeah, what happened is these used to actually have these very exaggerated facial expressions with them. So happy they were really grinning, like slightly maniacally so. And then at some point it stopped working, and now they just have the postures and not necessarily the facial expressions. But I mean, they could still work pretty well. It's actually probably better now that they're not working because they were like super over the top. So I'm going to go with scared for the initial dialogue. So after you save them, they're like very excited. Then they calm down in the next dialogue pane. All right. I tend to not like to use these animations on bridge officers because the bridge officers are more professional, so they're not going to be as given to exaggerated emotions. Plus, you never know when one of those bridge officers is a Vulcan.
Yeah.
Or a Borg.
Military is one that you can get a lot of mileage out of. They sort of look down and they have sort of a more serious posture. So that's generally a pretty good one, but you're looking at that or default. Arrogant, yeah, that doesn't come up. Scared, I think, is probably the one. Scared and angry are probably the two that you want to be most careful of because it's indicating an extreme emotion or an extreme response. And even for bridge officers that aren't Vulcan, to have that sort of very sort of losing it, sort of scared response, or just losing it in the other direction, being angry, it can really break character and can put your audience off because then all of a sudden they're reading that the character they created in their officer is suddenly behaving in a way that they're not accustomed to because Cryptic generally doesn't do those sorts of things either with their official missions.
Okay, so that about wraps up the first map. We are actually at the point where we're ready to beam down to the surface, which means we're ready to transition to our next map. So we need a transitional dialogue. I'm going to go ahead and use the engineering officer. Just have him say transporter rooms is standing by.
And it's also worth noting too is that the character options you have include all stock NPCs and any characters that you've created in the tailor, and those will actually be listed first, which is a pretty handy thing.
All right, so in most cases, you're going to want to leave from the whole map. And this is especially good because there's a weird bug. I shouldn't say it's a bug because it's more of a fundamental limitation of the Foundry. If a player leaves a Foundry mission and then comes back to it, it doesn't drop them right where they were originally off. It actually sends them back to the beginning of the mission, except that every map that they've completed will have all of their objectives completed. So if you're not careful and you have them having to leave from a specific location, you can run into issues where they either have to run across the map to get to the door to jump through the next map, or they're in a position where because of the way triggers are working or whatnot, the progress is blocked, and which makes your mission basically uncompletable in that state. So as a general, whenever possible, I like to leave from whole map.
For all my missions, I've left from the entire map. I've never used I've never changed that. And it's worked out great.
I mean, I'll even do in some cases where I'll have like a interact with the door as the last objective, and then have the leave from whole map.
Yeah.
I've actually only seen one mission where I can think of where leaving from a specific location on the map was actually beneficial, and then like you said though, is that they could have simply had you interact with the door and then leave from home map. But in this case, part of the reason why it works so well in that specific mission, which was Vulture Wheel, by the way, KDF Spotlight, I think, still not sure about, but it's still up. But anyway, part of the reason why it worked is that the door that you were leaving from is actually someplace that was relatively close to the spawn point for that map. You go around the map talking to people, maybe shooting a few things, and then you come back to a location that's actually pretty close to where you started. And that's where you leave the map from.
All right, so I think at this point we are ready to test our space map. I know I've been adding in a lot of stuff without showing you guys how it's going to play out, but I think we're about ready. So you can hit play map up here, and that will preview the map for that specific map that you're on. And we can test it and make sure it works.
Just as a quick note here, we have some inclement weather here. So if I suddenly disappear, it's because God has found me.
That's one of those things that, of course, we are doing this live, so we occasionally get unforeseen circumstances.
Oh, and, yeah. and like someone was saying earlier, in one specific case, I was working on playing a mission, and I actually had a thunderstorm kill the power, and thus, everything shuts off, and I lose my connection, et cetera, while I was in the middle of a Foundry mission. So you never know what can cause someone to have to stop playing in the middle of your mission.
Yeah, it's also another good.
A limited autosave when you're working in the Foundry, but it's always a good idea to hit the save button every so often.
I generally do it every time I do something.
You never know what autosave is actually going to save.
Well, funny thing is that since this is an online game, autosave is actually kicking in pretty frequently because it's syncing all of your changes to the server. Yeah, so, I mean, unless you literally just did something, it's most likely been saved. All right, so we got our opening dialog here. This will be as soon as we warp into the system. We are ordered to approach the planet. We got a little reach marker here. I should probably put in an icon or a blinky beacon. All right, so we scan Trimble, and detecting a faint warp trail leads in the direction of Trimble 5. It's funny, these planets didn't seem very far apart, but it takes me a while to get between them.
Because you're in a Miranda class.
Well, also there's the fact that when you're looking at them in the editor, what you see on the screen feels like it's about the size of a postage stamp, but it is like the entirety of a space map, which from an in-game perspective is something like what is it, like 600 or 1,000 kilometers wide.
It's a pretty big space.
So we got another dog. Sir, I'm detecting a Federation freighter on sensors. She appears to be under attack by Orion raiders. And there's our freighter. Okay, so you notice the freighter kind of warped suddenly. That is actually a bug, but it's a bug that only affects the Foundry preview. It'll be actually fine. Once the mission is published, but just something to be aware that it does occasionally happen in the Foundry preview.
Yeah, so that can make testing space combat especially difficult. One thing to note too is that, as you see in the live stream feed, in the bottom right, you can move that around, but right now in the bottom right is the Edit Tools button, where you can return back to the editor, reset the map, which allows you to go right back to the beginning without having to load everything up again. You can also set yourself to be invincible or untargetable, which can help if you're just wanting to look through things without having to really participate with combat. And then there's also another really useful button called Kill Target. It kills the target. So that's
Do
a
not
way.
use it on friendly NPCs. Yes, you can kill friendly NPCs with it.
Yeah. So that is generally what I use just to speed things along, to go through combat.
Yeah,
because with a Foundry editing character, you are not necessarily well developed. So it's useful to just go through it, just to sort of have in your mind that combat's taking place here, but because you're interested in testing the mission out, you want to see if the objectives work, if the maps look okay, the dialogue is fine, that flows well. So testing combat fully isn't something you have to do with every single run through. Just use the kill target button.
I mean, me personally, when I do test combat, it's pretty much the same as it would be if I was testing it on live, because my Foundry character is pretty well geared. But my Foundry character has been around since Season 3. I'm not really expecting most people to be able to have their Foundry character have quite that caliber of equipment.
Yeah, mine's still not even level 1 yet.
All right, so thankfully our contact has spawned properly. As far as I could tell, our NPC group stand-in he spawned just fine. Let's go ahead and talk to the freighter. They're very thankful. I forgot that this was a ship NPC, so adding in that scared animation was completely pointless. All right, you can see here's our dialogue choice that we made, so we can go ahead and ask if they need assistance.
And you can assign a person contact to that dialogue, but if you just leave it without doing that, you'll see the freighter.
All right, so they've located the... Okay, so I'm pretty sure it is not going to let me go on because I didn't create the next map. But you can kind of see, I mean, that worked out pretty well. Again, not too complex, but a good first example. With that, we finally finished our space map. We got to dig into using state transitions to set up a scene and have it progress from a battle to a conversation. Then we got to preview it and see how it looked. In the next episode, we finally get out of the stars and take our story down to the planet below, which is a fancy way to say we're going to start working on a ground map. But until next time, we will say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night good.